What's up guys, today I'm gonna share with you my secret way of playing the Nimzo-Indian Defense, which is a great opening weapon for black against the queen's pawn move pawn d4. To this you respond with knight to f6, and by the way, why not just play pawn d5, the queen's gambit? Well, it's a little bit dull and it's hard to get an active counterplay. That's why Nimzo actually can be much more interesting, especially with the way I'm going to share with you today. Now, here after white goes knight c3, they're getting ready to play e4 and to occupy the center, but you play bishop b4, and because the knight is now pinned, they can no longer push the central pawn forward, because if they try that, you're simply going to capture this pawn. It's going to be a blunder. They can't recapture, it is just bad for white. Now, the Nimzo-Indian Defense is named after Nimzovich, and why is it called Indian? Maybe he dreamed about an Indian wife. I don't know. Anyway, he did a good job popularizing this system, and his idea was that you don't have to necessarily put your own pawn to d5, because you can just control these central squares with your minor pieces, which gives you more active play without just fighting for equality. Now, here's the problem with the Nimzo-Indian Defense and why most players do not wish to play it. It's just very complicated. Because if you think about this, right now white can play virtually any move he wants. He can play knight f3, pawn e3, he can develop this bishop to any square he wants to, queen c2, queen b3, a3, you got it, right? And it feels very intimidating to even start learning this system. With that being said, it's still a very good system to play because you can play it from beginner all the way to grandmaster level. That's what I did. I played it since I was maybe 10 years old and all the way to the GM level. And again, there's a very nice way of playing it, which narrows it down fundamentally just to one aggressive setup that you can easily comprehend within this video, and you can start playing right after this. Now, although there are many moves that white can possibly play, the most natural and the most common one is knight f3, so let's begin with this move. Now, after this, I recommend that you play a super duper novelty 94 2 exclamation marks. And I'm giving it 2 exclamation marks, of course not for the objective strength of the move, it's just a move, but just for the fact that you narrow down all the theory to a single line that is easy to learn and hard for your opponent to deal with. Now, what's the advantage of playing knight e4? Well, there are many. Like, you shut down this e4 idea once and for all. They can't ever put their pawn there because it's now occupied by your own knight. Now, secondly, you never have to deal with the bishop g5 pin, which annoys many of you guys, I know this. So, because if you played any other move, there's always a risk that your opponent's gonna go bishop g5, put up this pin, and you'll have to deal with it somehow. When you go with your knight on e4, that's no longer an option. If he ever goes bishop g5, you just grab this bishop and it's game over for white. Therefore, they can't do it. Now, after knight e4, you also attack this knight on c3, which is pinned. Therefore, you just threaten to capture it, and white will need to defend it one way or the other. The most common way is queen c2, but if they play any other move, that's not going to change anything. Now, let's say queen c2. That's the most played move because it both defends this knight on c3 and also attacks your knight on e4. But we're not going to back down. We're going to support this knight with our pawn from f5, which means that he can't take it with the queen. This will lose the queen. And the knight is still pinned, therefore the knight from c3 cannot move at all. Therefore, we just solidify our knight over there. Now, they usually play something, let's say e3. Now, for now, the situation remains to be the same. Their knight is pinned, therefore we don't have to worry about this. And here's the next thing. You fianchetto your queenside bishop. Now, why do you want to do that? Why do you want to go b6 followed by bishop b7? Well, it's pretty clear that there is no bright future for your light square bishop along this diagonal, so you want to reposition it to a much better position. Now, after, let's say, they go bishop d3, by the way, notice that now they want to grab it with their bishop. Therefore, you're right on time to support it with your bishop. And now you're once again really cool. Now, your bishop from b7, first of all, controls this square e4 once again. And as we can see, right now, it's already useful. Plus, long term, it's going to put pressure to his kingside. And we anticipate him to castle right there, which will support your attack. And we'll see in a moment that it can become devastating for white really quickly. Now, a quick question is, what if he takes right here? Well, that's never a problem, because if he captures it with a bishop, you can recapture either with a bishop or with a pawn. Both ways are pretty great for you. For instance, if you take with a bishop, notice that this knight is still pinned, can't move, which means that you attack his queen, he has to move away, and he just allowed you to have this great bishop on e4. So that's one way. You can also recapture with a pawn, that's also good. Either way, it means that this is not a problem. Now, let's say they neutralize this pin somehow. So at some point, for example, they castle away from the pin, or they play bishop d2, and they neutralize the pin. If they do something like this, therefore their knight on the next move is actually free to go ahead and capture your knight on e4, then you want to trade it off. Now, you want to trade off your dark square bishop, because our knight on e4 is such a strong piece. It's one of the foundational elements of our attack, and also blocking his position altogether. They want to keep it there. Therefore, you just trade off your bishop. In the current position, there is also another upside that you also managed to create his double pawns, which is another little bonus for you that you get out of this exchange. But it doesn't matter too much. The main thing is that we wanted to keep this monstrous knight on e4. Now, after that, you just castle Kingside. And now we got into this pretty interesting position where at first looks like white played casual moves, everything's got to be good with him. But the reality is much trickier, because you have a very clear plan of attacking on the king side. You've got your bishop, which looks there. Also, thanks to this pawn on f5, it's very easy for you to make a rook lift somewhere there and also add it to your attack, or similarly you can lift your queen right there as well. And together with this bishop from b7, you can notice the pattern that we start putting together this devastating checkmating attack against his king. And what is your opponent going to do? It's much harder to answer that question. There is no clear plan that your opponent can try to execute. And usually just move around, they're not really sure what to do, and they go down pretty quickly. The most played move by white here is the move knight to d2, trying to trade off your powerful knight from e4. However, we immediately take advantage of the downside of this move. Since the knight is no longer on f3, it no longer guards these two squares, g5 and h4, which makes it very easy for us to throw our queen into the attack. And you can do that by playing queen h4, which serves both purposes. First, we're putting the queen closer to the king so that it solidifies our attack. But secondly, the queen also guards this knight on e4. Therefore, if white takes it, there's no problem. We are still maintaining our guard of this central square. And it's actually quite annoying for white, because they wanted to trade off this knight, but they still can't really do that. For instance, if they take, you just recapture with the pawn, and now you attack the bishop. It has to go back. They have to, put the bishop back to the passive square and lose tempo doing so. Plus, along the way, we opened up this f-file for our rook, which is also really great for our attack. There's also a little trick along the way. Some of your opponents will play g3, thinking that, they're kicking off the queen, and as it goes back somewhere, they can grab this pawn on e4. But of course, you can upset them with this nasty counter trick, pawn takes d3. So you let them grab your queen, because after that you grab theirs, and at the end of the day we're up a piece. Another common reaction of white is to play g3 straight away, thinking to push your queen away, just because after you played queen h4 they feel uncomfortable, they want to get rid of this annoying queen. And here comes some magic tricks, which are very common for this system. There are actually a couple funny tricks. One of them is playing knight g5, allowing them to capture the queen. But after they do so, all of a sudden it's this tricky, sneaky checkmate delivered by the knight. Very unusual and very cool. But the way which I think is stronger, because here with knight g5, you kind of rely on his blunder, right? I think knight takes d2 with similar ideas is actually stronger and simpler for you to play. Now, you still let them capture your queen, and some of them may indeed go ahead and capture it. They may think that you're going to take the rook, but you're not going there. You play knight f3 check. And after the king goes somewhere, doesn't matter, you then have another nasty discover check, knight takes d4, check from this bishop. You see that our bishop is really playing this super crucial role into our attack. And after that, we're going to take their queen on c2. So let's say here, knight takes c2, bishop takes, and by now it's getting clear that your opponent made his very best to get into chess books as an example of how not to play with his pawns, right? They're all doubled, isolated, weak, and clearly that should be easily winning for you. All right, let's assume your opponent is playing all correct moves. Therefore, after you took here on d2, he simply recaptures. What are you going to do then? Well, although there is no immediate danger, still you can notice this strong bishop and weaknesses around his king, so that's what we're going to capitalize on. Now, the most tempting idea would be to play queen h3, trying to play queen g2 mate. But the problem here is that he can play pawn f3, block the diagonal that way, and now it's not very clear how you can continue your attack from here. Therefore, instead of queen h3, I recommend that you play a trickier move, queen to g4. And from here, we are controlling this square, therefore he can't play f3 anymore, we will just grab this pawn, and if he doesn't do anything, we're going to play potentially queen to f3, followed by queen g2 mate. So we have this kind of more profound maneuver, which is hard for him to deal with. And I'll just show you one game that illustrates how difficult for white it is to cope with it. In this game, they play rook e1, possibly getting ready to play e4. Black played bishop f3, also a nice move just to shut down this whole thing so that the king can never run away. White played bishop f1, trying to get control over these squares. Black played rook f6. This is a very common rook lift. We discussed it. You use it in lots of variations of this system because you want to just put all your pieces to the king side and checkmate him. Very straightforward. White tried h3, trying to get rid of the queen, but black just boldly ignored it and played rook h6. Now, it turns out that black wants to capture this pawn and get to the king within 2 moves. And if white tries to capture the queen himself, then it's still rook h1 checkmate. On a side note, if you also master the King's Indian Defense and the Queen's Indian Defense, you may face the baby Indian attack, so be careful. Now, jokes aside, of course, let's come back to this position. I want to show you one more attacking pattern that you can use, and you don't have to memorize all these lines, of course. But the fact is, we're going to aim for this particular structure. And from here on, you're going to need to know how to develop your middle game attack. That's why I want to show you some common attacking patterns. Now, another common way for white to play this position is to play bishop a3. The move which seems to be perfectly logical for white. They need to develop this bishop anyway, and they put it to a long diagonal and attack your rook. What more can they ask for from a single move? But in fact, this move is wrong, because the bishop doesn't do all that much from here, and you are going to make this rook lift anyway. Therefore, your opponent is only helping you to execute your plan, and from here, this bishop attacks emptiness. It's not doing anything else. Therefore, it's just a common error, but it's going to show how difficult it is for white to play. Now, after rook f6, you probably want to go rook g6 and team up against his king, something like this. Therefore, white really needs to rush and do something. White currently plays knight d2. They still want to neutralize this knight and do something, but you can still ignore it and play rook h6. Another cool thing, you're getting ready to play queen h4 and to hopefully checkmate him soon. Now, there are a couple of very interesting lines that may arise from this position. If they play g3, thinking that now you can't throw your queen out of here, what do? You do it anyways, queen h4. And you still threaten boldly queen h2 mate. But how about them just taking your queen? Well, now you play a rook g6 check, the king has to move, and here comes the final blow, knight takes f2, which is a double check from a knight and bishop, which means that this is also a checkmate. An interesting fact is white is gone here regardless of what they choose to play. If they don't do anything, you just take here with checkmate. If they try knight f3, attacking your queen for the second time, and thinking that there is no way on earth this queen is not moving from here, you leave it right there and you play knight g5. That's another brilliant move, and here it's a really great variation to collect a number of brilliant moves to your arsenal. Now, after knight g5, if he takes the queen, there's knight h3 checkmating better. We've seen it in one of the previous variations, and here it works as well. Now let's take it back. What else can he play? If he captures right here with a pawn, then there is also a similar tactical pattern that we have seen in the previous line, check to the king, and then we're ready to continue our attack one way or the other, or to exploit the discover check. For instance, if he goes here, we can jump with our knight somewhere, exposing this discover check. But in this case, we don't even need the queen, because we are actually checkmating the king. If it goes back, there is just rook g6. And if it goes forward somewhere here, we just keep chasing the king, bishop, then rook check, here comes rook check, and there, for example, knight to c6, checkmate. A really unusual line, but you're actually likely to accomplish it in the actual game because white's previous moves were very natural to play. Let's also talk about the station when your opponent is prudent and playing all the careful moves. Now, in this case, white should not play g3. Generally speaking, in this variation, playing g3 is very dangerous for white because it exposes this diagonal. But your opponent often is not aware of this until they're checkmating. Anyway, if white takes here on a4, now you do not want to recapture because then he takes and he's getting more attack here than you, so he is going to win a pawn. But what helps you is this in-between move queen h4, threatening mate. And if white plays h3, then now you can recapture, and now your pawn is guarded twice, therefore he can take it. That would just lose a piece. And if he just goes back, then after that, there is no immediate checkmate that you can accomplish. I mean, you can still try playing rook g6, and then that threatens queen takes h3. But if white plays some careful moves, perhaps you cannot checkmate him right away. But then you just turn into a more methodical development of your attack. You play pawn d6, bring your knight over here. It's quite common for you to develop the knight that way, because if you put it to c6, it obstructs your own bishop. Therefore, you want to bring it right here. So white plays, let's say something, you bring the knight right here, and now it's a harmonious position. Your bishop is still active along this diagonal, and your knight is ready to join the party. You're ready to play rook f8, and add this rook into the attack. Your knight can keep jumping forward. So you just start developing this attack gradually, and you keep maintaining pressure against his kingside. Alright, now let's explore certain other options that your opponents may choose to play here. And once again, the beauty of the system is that we're gonna aim for the same system regardless of what your opponent chooses to play. And that's why I do believe that this system is far superior for an average, amateur player compared to anything else, because usually chess tutorials just advise you a bunch of complex variations played by Carlsons and Karpovs in the Nimzo-Indian Defense, but it's impossible to comprehend all that. Now, this system is much simpler and much better. Now, let's say white plays something like e3 or bishop d2, like any kind of little bit passive move. Now, in that case, of course, you could play knight e4 right away, as we discussed previously. However, you don't have to rush with this move. You can also first Fianchetto your queenside bishop. And in this position, it's perfectly fine to do that, because if they played e3 or bishop d2 on the previous move, then they're not threatening bishop g5 anymore. Right? That was the pin which annoyed us, and we wanted to avoid that by playing knight e4 quickly. But now, thanks to this pawn, he can't play bishop g5 out. And similarly, if let's say white were to play bishop d2, it's unlikely that they play bishop g5 on the next move, right? Probably not. That's why you're quite safe to play b6 and then bishop b7 first, so you're kind of a little bit hiding your actual intent. But let's come back to e3, because it's a lot more popular. You're just going to go b6. Then he probably will develop one of his pieces somehow. You put the bishop out of here, and you're already threatening this pawn. And as white plays knight f3, you then puts your knight on e4 right on time. Notice that the knight is still pinned, and that's important, so he can't take your knight, and then we play knight e4. Now the knight is pinned, he can't take it. If he captures it with a bishop, that's just an exchange, you're still cool, fundamentally nothing changes too much, and your bishop is still pretty cool. On e4, you're still gonna play f5, maybe take on c3 at some point, and develop all the similar attack that we discussed previously. Now, probably your pawn will notice that you're putting pressure against this knight. They'll want to defend it by playing queen to c2, and then you can turn it back into what we discussed so far. You can trade off this knight, double his pawns, play pawn f5, and we got the position we're aiming at. Then you castle, and it's all the same stuff. Now let's move on to some ways that your opponent may try to use to disrupt your system, and one of them is playing a3 straight away. Now, after this exchange, typically, common tutorials recommend that you go after this pawn on c4 by playing b6, bishop a6, moving your knight right there, and after that, again, there's like very complex theory that arises from this. Guess what we're gonna do instead? We're gonna bring it back to our system nevertheless. And by the way, I mean, maybe it sounds cocky, but I do believe that this free tutorial that you're watching right now is much better than lots of the paid courses about the Nimzo-Indian that I've seen, because again, it's much more practical, much more aggressive. And if you're getting value, also consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. That supports the channel and makes it easier for me to record way more content for you in the future. Now, so what are we going to do here? We got to be ready, because in this system, when they want to really have this mass of pawns in the middle of the board, they often play f3 and e4 then, and then, you can't play your system. So what do? You go knight e4 straight away. That attacks the pawn, and your opponent often feels uncomfortable about that. But on top of that, we also prevent him from playing this thing f3, because if he goes there, we're not even going to take the pawn. That's actually wrong for black. If you take there, the knight is going to be trapped. So let me show you. So if you go that way, the knight is trapped. We don't want that. But instead, there is a winning move for black, which is queen h4 check. That's the trick. Now, it's nearly checkmate. The only move to save it is g3, but then you sack the knight right here, and we take advantage of this pin. And we attack the rook anyway, therefore you have to take, but then they lose the rook, therefore they lost the pawn, and they exchange, and you got a winning advantage. You're also attacking the knight over here, everything's cool. Which means that they can't play pawn f3, they have to probably guard this pawn somehow, and they usually play, again, the same move, queen c2, attacking your knight and guarding the pawn. Then we play pawn f5, and it's basically all the same stuff. If they ever play f3, it still fails to the same queen h4 thing. Now I'm drawing it wrong, it's like this. And if he just plays knight f3, then we go b6, and guess what? We brought it back to our system. Da-da-da-dum! And hopefully you're gonna have this strong kingside attack on the following moves. There's also another common move played by a lot of GMs, but also a lot of amateur players. It's the move queen c2. And at first, once again, it looks challenging, because they do control this square with their queen. And they threaten to go e4 on the next move if you do nothing special. Therefore, it looks like again your system cannot be executed, but guess what? We're gonna push it down their throat anyway. You just take here on c3. And again, I would put 2 exclamation marks to this move, not for the objective strength of the move, but just for simplicity. Again, you don't have to learn any complex theory, because if you try studying main lines of this queen c2 variation, like, good luck. There are thick books written just about this single variation alone. But we're gonna play bishop takes c3. They'll probably recapture with the queen, because that's why they put their queen on c2 in the first place. They wanted to prevent you from capturing here and doubling your opponents. That's why they'll probably capture like this. But now this square is no longer defended, and we can play knight e4, attack of the queen. The queen goes somewhere, and then, as always, when they attack the knight, we play pawn f5. Da-da-da-dum! Once again, we got the same thing, right? Knight f3, b6, bishop b7, castle, all standard stuff. Now, they do not have double pawns right here on c3, which is a slight advantage for white. However, generally speaking, it doesn't change anything. Like, after that, if you look at this system altogether, like, it's all the same stuff. And the fact that the pawn is here, not here, doesn't change too much in your plan overall. Anyway, you're gonna attack right there in the Kingside, in the middle game. Now we're gonna need to talk about the move bishop g5, which is about the only move that really not allows you to play the system you wanted to play. Luckily, it's not a very popular move. It's been played only in like 10% of games, which means that you're gonna face it in 1 out of 10 games. And objectively, it's of course not very dangerous anyway. It's just that you can't play the same system. Now, what do you do in case bishop g5? Well, what I recommend is you use the zigzag system. Like, quite often people are just scared about this pin, but you can also ask yourself another question, which is interesting. What's the downside of this move? And the downside is they reposition the bishop from queenside to the kingside, which means that their own queenside is now no longer defended, and you can counter-strike there. You do that by going pawn c5 first, which is a double-purpose move. First, you attack his center, but secondly, you also open up this diagonal for your queen to escape from the pin, number one, and secondly, to counterattack. And sometimes it can be really annoying. For instance, if white goes e3, this is already kind of wrong, because you play queen a5 straight away, and notice that because of this pawn, they can't bring their bishop back. They can't defend their queen side. And now you're threatening bishop takes c3 check. We have this battery of pieces attacking it. Plus, because of this pin, we're also threatening to play knight e4 on the next move and add even more fire to our attack. From here, we're going to attack both the bishop and the knight. And, white can go down pretty quickly from here. So e3 is already kind of wrong for white. The main move and most played move is pawn d5. Now, maybe they want to play d6 and press your position, so you play d6 yourself, and then after whatever they play, you then trade on d5. Now, the nice thing for us is that he can't still recapture with a knight. It's still pinned, as always, in the Nimzo-Indian Defense. So he's going to recapture like this. And now we can play knight b to d7. And that solves the problem of this pin, because we have the other knight supporting this one, which means that your queen is always free to go wherever it wants, and this pin does not bother us. Plus, on the next move, let's say white plays something. You can either just castle and play normal chess, just finalize your development, or you can rush into your own counter-attack with this zigzag thing, right? He went to the left side of the board, so we're going to the right side right away. We go queen a5, put in this attack against his knight. Now, we don't worry about him taking this knight because we've got the supported knight. We're going to just recapture, we're fine. Now, white needs to defend this knight somehow. And funnily enough, it's not easy to do that at all. For instance, if white goes queen d2, then yeah, they're guarding the knight, but they're putting one more piece into the same line, and we can take advantage of that by going knight e4, and now they're going down completely. We're attacking just way too much. We're gonna take on c3 on the next move and win. So queen d2 doesn't work. Queen c2 guards the knight, but drops this pawn on d5. The queen no longer defends it, so we can play knight takes d5. We want a pawn, and we keep attacking this knight. So once again, white's going down. It's not good. How about queen to b3? Where it seems to defend both the pawn and the knight. Guess what? You can go knight e4. That's one of those common ideas that we discussed, but it's even stronger to just play knight takes d5. You temporarily sacrifice the knight, but on the next move you play bishop takes c3, check, and attack of the pawn, and if he takes, queen takes c3. Once again, it's a double attack. We win the rook, we keep attacking, and we win the game. Is there any way for white to defend this knight at all? What about rook to c1? Well, we still have this move knight to e4, taking advantage of the pin, but after the rook goes to c1, there is an even smaller way to take advantage of this move. It's the move queen takes a2. Quite a sudden move. We're still taking advantage of this pin, and we shamelessly grab the pawn. Moreover, we're going to grab the other one on the next move and threaten the knight again. And if they try to guard it somehow, like queen to d2, you can play this really humiliating move, queen takes d5. I mean, there are many moves that you can play, but queen takes d5 is a really great way to completely, destroy your pawn's position and self-confidence, because this knight can capture this queen. But it does really work because you capture their queen as well. And then on the next move, you also get back the piece and you end up with a couple extra pawns and a winning position. And if you want to level up your chess overall beyond opening knowledge and moves, then check out this free masterclass that levels up your positional understanding. Either way, have a great day.